Gwilym Morus-Baird is here with me today to talk about this and that. Gwyl's a musician and an author, and he teaches courses about my favorite topic, Celtic myth. We've known each other for a few years, but we've never really sat down and had a proper talk. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks so much for coming along to talk to me, Gwyl.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So you've recently written a book called Taliesin Origins, which I just happen to have a copy of here. Already looking a bit used. You'll be pleased to hear.
Oh, good.
So we'll be talking about Taliesin's place in Welsh history and culture in a bit, but you're obviously passionate about Taliesin. So who is Taliesin to you? What's his place in your inner life?
Oh, well, he's my first connection to what we might generally call my Welsh spiritual life, I suppose. These terms are a little clunky and awkward, but I suppose that's the best way of putting it in English. From a very young age, I had a fascination with the Taliesin tradition, the Taliesin myth, the folk tale. I appear to have come under the influence of Taliesin-like poetry in my teenage years. I find, sort of that influence in scraps of poetry I still have from those days. He was the first point of entry into the spiritual dimension of my own culture, I suppose. Yeah, so very formative figure for me in my early years in particular. I mean, he comes and goes. I've spent over the years, I went and wandered off into other texts and other myths and other things, but I keep coming back to Taliesin, and it was natural for Taliesin to be the first book that I published. I mean, there was a choice of a few, but that was the one that turned up. Yeah,
That kind of comes through in your work, that he's very important to you, for sure. So you've been teaching online courses for quite a few years now. Did you know when you started out that most of your students would end up coming from the neopagan community, or was that a surprise?
that was a surprise. That was a surprise. I think the first online class I did was about 10 years ago now, maybe 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago. And I kind of had an inkling that I would attract people from the sort of the modern druidry scene for sure. I'd done workshops in festivals and things, and I'd been invited to talk a few times by some of my wilder friends who live down Glastonbury way. So I kind of had an inkling, but I didn't realize that the courses that I wanted to put on would be far more popular with that crowd than anyone else, actually. So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. But not anymore. It's half the course now.
Does that affect the way you teach? Has it changed the way you see the material you're teaching?
Yes and no. I think it's made me a bit more considerate of how culture evolves and how culture really doesn't have many boundaries as humans like to think of them. And I think it's made me more sensitive to opening the space for interpretation and spiritual interpretation and perhaps even mysticism, allowing for more of those types of conversations on the courses. But to be honest, I feel like almost unknowingly, I was kind of heading in that direction myself anyway, I think. Like I said, Taliesin was an important figure for me in my own connection to my own culture, the spirit of my own culture, what we might call the spiritual philosophy of the Celtic tradition. I suppose what was more unexpected was the amount of people from that broader worldwide global community and, trying to respond to their needs, I suppose, it's led me to change my mind a few times about some of the assumptions that I picked up during university life in particular, particularly about meaning, potential meaning, symbolic meaning. What can we say about stuff? It's certainly, I've been encouraged to not loosen. It's not that I'm less rigorous, but I'm definitely more open to different interpretations than I was, for sure, when I was younger. Yeah.
Can you give an example of that at all? Or
To illustrate it best, considering that there is a historical paganism in Welsh culture, but it's a historical paganism that we can easily lose sight of, and that it can easily be obscured. Particularly when we get into the modern period and the early modern period, when the Tale of Taliesin was first written down about 500 years ago. It's not very obvious where the paganism is in Welsh culture, but we know it's definitely there. And in my earlier days in university, I wasn't so concerned about exploring that part of things. I wasn't that bothered about how that could be presented in a coherent way. And I suppose it's made me change my attitude to that strand of the tradition, and over the years, just to take it a bit more seriously, I think, just because I've seen how it is alive in the different communities that I come across during my teaching work. And because of that life, you want to acknowledge it and respond to it differently. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I've always found you very respectful to people, even when they have maybe some quite far out ideas. You're always very careful, and nobody ends up, I think, walking away from your courses feeling like they've been attacked, or that's too strong, but they don't feel embarrassed by what they've said.
Well, I suppose that, maybe as I mature, hopefully, as a teacher, there's nothing worse than closing someone's own thinking and experience down. It's much better if I do, it's very rarely that I do come across sort of extreme or off the wall attitudes that I simply can't agree with. But when I do, it's much better to maintain good relations with the person and to maybe try and gently influence their thinking as a friend, as a
Yeah,
companion on the journey, as opposed to a top-down, heavy-handed attitude, which just puts people off and doesn't work. It just compounds the problem. So I think, whenever I have come across difficult attitudes, I just want to give them space, because they usually don't take up that much space on the courses. I'm more interested in people engaging creatively with the material, I suppose, which is one of the other differences that I try and introduce. It's I obviously come from an academic background, but I'm not running strict academic courses. I'm more interested in how people engage with the materials, because that's where the life of it is and the energy is. That's what I'm after, really. Yeah.
yep, yep. So you call your website and social media channels Celtic Source. So
Mm-hmm.
the word Celtic has been questioned and discussed a lot. Some people go as far as to say things online, especially, as there's no such thing as Celtic, not really being very informed about the whole argument, I think. But that's kind of forced everybody to constantly qualify how we're using the word, almost to apologize for using it sometimes. Yet you persist. So are
Yeah,
you making a bit of a statement?
maybe. I mean, most people who deny the existence of Celts just aren't Celts. It's that simple. I don't see what the problem is, really. Even if I don't know how many, what we might call, sort of fully signed up members of the Celtic nations with Celtic passports and all that stuff. I don't know, we could say there's 3 million, 3.5, maybe 4 million of us at a push. What are you? If we suddenly woke up yesterday and suddenly decided to call ourselves Celts, it would still be valid. Doesn't matter whether we dreamt it up yesterday or not. If we identify as a group in that way, then who gets to say that we're not? And more perversely, even, there is a formal, accepted, boring linguistic category known as Celtic, which applies to a bunch of historic people who have historic connections. So, like, I just think I think it arises from a strand of scholarship that just has got too much time on its hands, basically. And I mean, genuinely, I think it's a problem in academia anyway. I'm don't want to talk academia down too much because I have a lot of respect for a lot of some scholars, but there is a part of academia where they just have to make work for themselves, and the best way to make work is to just criticize other people's ideas. Like there's a good trade in being overly skeptical and just putting down other people's ideas. It's much easier also to take down an idea than to build one up. So it comes from that type of skepticism in my mind comes from a type of lack of imagination, because you
Mhm.
can't come up with your own ideas. So your whole career is built up on knocking down other people's. But I just don't even bother thinking about it these days. I don't even take it seriously as a proposition. It's just nonsense.
Mhm.
There are Celts. We are here. We do Celtic things. Get over it.
Yeah. So most of your teaching over the years has been focused on the four branches and the Book of Taliesin. That's the four branches of the Mabinogi for anybody listening who's not sure what I mean. I feel like they're intrinsically linked for you, Taliesin and the four branches. Can you explain why that is?
Well, if Taliesin was my guide, if you like, the first one who introduced me into the landscape, then the landscape is the four branches of the Mabinogi, because they're a profound set of tales which evoke some fascinating discussions and conversations about what I would call a spiritual philosophy. And whereas Taliesin's myth also includes some very profound ideas about your spirit and your soul and life and death and engagement with culture and creative practice and all that stuff. The four branches kind of develop that field much further. They're kind of endlessly fascinating in that sense. I mean, I went from teaching a 4-week course to an 8-week course to a 12-week course to a 16-week course to two 12-week courses. And now, I kind of have to put a stop on it somewhere. Like, I can't just keep making the courses longer because, I just don't have enough time, basically. So trying to rein in the abundance that I find in the four branches is tricky sometimes. It's just during my degree, the first part of the first branch of the Mabinogi was the first time I realized that we could interpret myths in a way which draws out some rather profound lessons about life, I feel. That's basically it.
When I first found your work, I think we all like a bit of validation, don't we? And it seemed like everything you were saying about the four branches, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm on the right track with this. Here's a guy with a PhD who thinks the same thing.
Yeah.
It was
We're,
great to find somebody with that attitude.
we're rare. I don't think we're that common, but yeah, there are some of us out here.
Yeah, for sure. So now you're starting teaching this new project this month,
Mhm.
covering three big groups of Irish stories, 10
Mhm.
weeks each on the mythological cycle, Ulster cycle, Fenian cycle.
Mhm.
And that feels like quite a big leap from the Welsh material. I'm curious about what prompted that.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, they are totally unique stories in the Irish tradition, but they also, in a very general sense, do a similar thing in that they are symbolically potent. Now, then, not necessarily as radical as the four branches of the Mabinogi. And, people might think, well, that's a strange thing to say about the four branches because it's kings and queens and very conservative roles in society. But I believe that there is a way of reading the four branches where it's very subversive, it's very radical in terms of power and spiritual power. And whereas the majority of the Irish stories aren't that radical. A few are, but they're still coming from a storytelling tradition which is trying to show more than tell. It's trying to show models of good social behavior, or models of good kingship, or models of, how we treat abundance, or, what comes out of our bodies, or what have you. That they're still trying to teach, I suppose. They're trying to reveal values and philosophies and concepts that are deeply embedded in the ancient Celtic world, and what's slightly easier about the Irish material is that we don't have to fight about the fact about whether they're gods or not, because the Christians back in the day didn't have a problem saying, these are gods, that's not a problem. Whereas in the Welsh tradition, there is sometimes a bit of difficulty, sort of pushing through this rather heavy skepticism that, well, nowhere in the Welsh tradition are these called gods, so we can't call them gods, as if like myths need big labels pointing to them all the time. I'm finding different challenges, let's say, with the Irish material, and I just feel like I'm, having wandered around in the landscape of Irish myth for a few years now, I just felt more comfortable with what I had, and just felt like there was an opportunity to use the material again for discussion, which is what I really love doing on the courses.
Yeah. Have you been working toward that for a while, behind the scenes, so to speak?
Yeah, off and on for about 3 or 4 years. I'd never really thought I would ever do it, but I just feel like, part of it is going back to the name, because I call the website Celtic Source. And most people around the planet, when they think Celtic, they think Irish, which is fine, not a problem with that. I felt to do the subject justice, I really had to provide a space to explore the broader Celtic tradition, because in my line of work, and I'm sure in yours too, the comparisons between Welsh myths and Irish myths are actually really fruitful, and they're actually very useful. And I kept coming up against Irish stories that were brilliant illustrations of one concept or philosophy or another, and just thinking, eventually, just do it. It's fine. It appears to be something that people want to do as well. So yeah.
One of my great joys is comparing Irish and Welsh myth. I do a lot of that. And for me, it's partly a way to make sense of how Scotland sits in the Brythonic and the Goidelic worlds. But what do you think for people who are primarily interested in one or the other, whose focus they think at least is Irish or it's Welsh kind of exclusively, what can they gain by crossing over more?
More funny words to start with. There's that. There's a broader exposure to Celtic culture. You call your work going deeper, and that spatial metaphor is so powerful because it's so true. Yeah, there is, as you know, there is a great depth in these stories. But the deeper you go, the more misty the landscape gets, and the more difficult it is to have guidelines. So having comparative tales just kind of keeps you on the right track. If we find similar mythic forms in a Welsh story and an Irish story, well, either there was a borrowing, or we're really deep in Celtic history, looking at an original prototype of a story that was being told before Welsh and Irish diverged. So, what, 2.5, 3,000, 3,500 years ago? We're not really clear on these numbers, but at least 3,000 years ago. So we're really deep in Celtic culture when we're looking at these comparative structures, if you like. So I don't feel like you can really understand the Celtic tradition without looking at least a little bit at the various expressions of that broader Celtic tradition. And it's one of the reasons why these arguments about Celts not existing is just stupid. It's just ridiculous. It's just patently obvious that there are deep, profound connections between these two cultures that both speak Celtic languages. It's just, yeah, it's like, oh, come on, people.
I think a lot of people might find the idea of taking a course on Celtic mythology from a guy with a PhD a bit intimidating. So before we go on and talk about the book, maybe this would be a good time for you to just, can you describe to the listeners a little bit about what your live courses are actually like? What can they expect?
Well, I like to talk and I like to hear people talking and I like to discuss things in a relaxed and loose and comfortable and open way. And I do like to prompt, and sometimes I'll ask quite difficult questions, and I like to challenge people sometimes to really think about what they mean. But it's all in the spirit of discovery and exploration. I feel like there's a particular magic in really good discussions when they go really well, and that we're all in it together and we all kind of discover these new vistas together. It's like, oh wow, yeah. A lot of my work was refined in these discussions. I didn't a lot of the more potent ideas, I think, in the book of Taliesin, I kind of had seeds of these ideas when I was in university, and I had the basic premises, but where they really came alive is when I spoke to people, when I talked to people, which is, I've got an acknowledgement in the book to everybody who comes to the Celtic Source courses, like, thanking them that, like, this book wouldn't be possible without them. So yes, there are challenges. Yes, it can be complicated sometimes, it can be confusing, it can be a bit baffling, but that's the world of learning. That's kind of, if you really want to learn something and really get the richness of Celtic myth, I just think you have to put yourself in a position where it might be complicated sometimes. But it's not that. I mean, Chris, it's not that bad, is it?
No, I never found your classes scary or in any way, or like I was being put on the spot. I think that's something a lot of people are scared of.
It is natural, I think, to, especially when you don't know the people you're going to turn up to discuss with. What You don't know what the level is, you don't know how they're going to approach this. I could be a total idiot and an arrogant idiot. You don't know, but also you don't know until you turn up.
Exactly. So some people will be listening to this after your autumn classes have started. I know the Irish course starts on Sunday the 22nd, is it?
It is in a
Yeah,
few
so
days.
that this will be out before that, but only a few days. Can
Mhm.
people still sign up and get involved after that date? Or are there other avenues for them?
Yeah, so I'm I try to meet people where they are. Some people want to come to live courses, and if there's a live course running, you can join it. It doesn't matter if you've missed the first 10 and there's only 2 left. You're welcome to turn up. It's fine. You're obviously going to have to take a bit of a back seat, but yeah, I mean, hey, it's fine. So it's very relaxed in that sense. A lot of people, actually, most of the people who engage with my materials do so at their own time. They don't come to the live courses. They just watch the video lectures and then they listen to the discussions. So the format is always, I'll prepare materials and record it. There's between half an hour and an hour's worth of me talking to listen to during the week, and then we turn up and we talk about it. There's reading often. There's going to be a lot more reading on the Irish Myths course because we're looking at significant chunks of text. I love the golden age of learning that we're in. Technology, for however much we complain about it and however problematic it can be, it has really opened up. I mean, I'd never met you, Chris. I'd never know about your work. We wouldn't be having this conversation. You know, it wouldn't be possible unless we had this amazing facility of cameras and computers, but also the way to record conversation and video and replay. And like YouTube's just, yeah, there's some weird corners of it, but generally speaking, YouTube's an amazing place. And our ability to share knowledge and information and experience and conversation is just totally revolutionary. I wouldn't be able to do this without it. I'm sure you'd agree. It's the same for you,
Mhm.
Chris.
And finally, before we get into the book, where can people get more information about the classes and sign up for them?
So just go to celticsource.online, to the website.
So dot online.
.online.
Right.
Celticsource.online. I don't know why I didn't go for .com. I just like the online, but whatever. It's Celtic Source, all one word, .online. And you can, sign up at any time. If you go to the courses page, there's an explanatory video that tells you all the ways it works. Hopefully it's simple enough.
Great. Well, I'll make sure that the link to that is in the description for this video as well. And I should mention, you also have a very good YouTube channel. I'm always sending people to go and watch this or that video of yours because I'm too lazy to answer a question.
That's what it's for. Yeah, that's what it's for. I do the same thing. Yeah.
Good. So let's get down to the book, Taliesin Origins. There it is, Taliesin Origins.